What's up, guys? Welcome back to another Madden 20 deep dive where we take a deeper look into and analyze different aspects and features of franchise mode. In the first deep dive, we took a look at sim stats, and today what we're going to be looking at is what's been touted as franchise mode's biggest feature this year, and that's going to be the scenario engine. So what I did was started up a franchise using the Denver Broncos, and I picked them simply because I wanted a team near the middle of the league when it came to overall rather than one of the best or the worst teams in the league. I then went through 5 seasons of franchise mode just as I normally would as a user, with the only exception being that I simulated both weekly training and the games themselves. But outside of that, I did all of the preseason cutdowns, all of the scouting, roster moves, free agency, and drafting. Basically, I wanted this to be as close to normally playing through a franchise as possible, with the exception of actually playing the games, which was just done for the sake of time, and I'll get into how that can change things a bit later in the video. Then, as I went along, I kept track of all the scenarios or interactions that occurred, when they occurred, what kind of scenario it was, who was involved, the choices that I had to choose from, the choices I made, and any goals that came with those choices, as well as whether the goal was passed or failed, and then any rewards or penalties that I got as a result of the scenario. And then lastly here, before I started, the main points that I wanted to focus on once I had this scenario data were variety and how many different scenarios you'd see over the course of each season, as well as over multiple seasons, frequency and how often scenarios were occurring and how much you'd see them throughout the season, and then finally impact and how much your team was positively and negatively affected by these scenarios and how that related to the types of scenarios that you were facing. So what I'm going to do is just present the data that I have for each of these points first, and then go over my thoughts on each at the end of the video. So starting here with variety, over the course of the 5 seasons, I saw a total of 89 scenarios of 19 different varieties that fell into 9 different categories. The most common scenario was predictably the X Factor scenarios, which you get when your upcoming opponent has an X Factor, and more than half of the scenarios that I encountered were of this variety. Something interesting here that I noticed, and I'm not sure if it's intended or not, but it wasn't something that always triggered. For example, in Season 1, the first time I played the Chargers, I only got the X Factor scenario for Joey Bosa, even though they also had Phillip Rivers and Melvin Gordon on the team. And then the second time around, I got it for both Bosa and Phillip Rivers. Then in the second season, the first time I played the Chargers, I again only got the Bosa X Factor scenario, while the second time I played them a few weeks later, I only got the Melvin Gordon scenario. Another thing here is that throughout all 5 seasons, I didn't see a single X Factor scenario for a wide receiver, tight end, or safety, and that wasn't at all due to simply not playing any. Using the Broncos, I faced Antonio Brown twice a year, Travis Kelce twice a year, and at safety, Derwin James twice a year, but didn't have a single scenario when facing any of them at any point throughout the 5 seasons. The next most common scenario I encountered came from the team beat reporter. A couple of these were basically onboarding scenarios with the preseason kickoff and post-game reaction, and they only popped up at the beginning of my first season. She would also chime in after an important win. However, this was something that was bugged, and if you lost following an important win, the scenario would continue to trigger until you won another game, but the data here only includes the ones that triggered properly. And then the other scenario from the beat reporter came when you qualified to coach for the Pro Bowl. Next up is the frustrated player scenario that seemed to be limited to 2 positions, which were the receiver and running back. One thing here that I noticed as well was that a lot of times it seemed like this scenario would pop up following an injury. There was a couple instances where a starter went down and this scenario would immediately trigger, which I believe may have been due to the fact that the backup moved up on the depth chart and his numbers therefore didn't coincide with that new spot on the depth chart, but I'm not exactly sure if that's the case or not. Then we have the mentorship scenario, which I saw with 2 different positions. One was the offensive line, which happened every season I played in the same week with the same choices, and after season 1 was also involving the same player. The other one I only saw once, and that was for wide receiver, which happened only during the first season. Beyond that, we have the bye week scenario, which is a scenario that happened every season during the bye week, and while the player that came to you would change, the dialogue and choices were always the same, while the outcomes would vary slightly. The breakout player scenario scenario was one that I only saw 3 times over the course of the 5 seasons. However, if I was actually playing the games, I feel like it was something that I would have seen a lot more often. The short week scenario is another one like the bye week where you'd have the choice between rest or preparation, and it triggered every time I had a Thursday night game, but there were a couple seasons where my team didn't have a Thursday night game, so that's why it only triggered the 3 times. The players only meeting scenario was a contextual scenario that would happen when your team was on a losing streak, and it triggered 3 times over the 5 seasons. Each time it triggered for me, it was the same decision to call out the defensive line, linebackers, or defensive backs, and I'm not sure if the same can be done for the offensive side of the ball, but if it could, I didn't see it. And then the last type of scenario that I saw was the player development scenario, which was just an onboarding scenario that gets new users familiar with the dev trait mechanics, and it was only seen prior to my first preseason game. One thing to note here is that a lot of these scenarios are somewhat contextual, so the frequency in which you see them will vary. If you never go on a losing streak, you're not going to see things like the players only meeting, and if you play in a division where the other teams in your division have very few X factors, that's likely going to severely limit how much you see that kind of scenario. But moving on to frequency, here's a look at how many scenarios I saw in each of the 5 seasons I played. Again, here I didn't include the important win beat reporter scenarios that were triggering improperly in this data. And another thing to mention here is that I didn't include the follow-up interactions as part of these numbers either. So for example, with the frustrated receiver or running back scenario, you get the initial scenario of the receiver or running back coming to you about being frustrated. Then the next week he'd follow up after the game, and I only counted that as one scenario since they're both part of the same situation. This is important to mention because while these numbers show that you'll be seeing around 1 scenario per week over the course of the season, for the most part it will be something that you'll see week in and week out throughout the year. Once the regular season ends though, that's pretty much it, as the only scenario I saw following week 17 was the beat reporter congratulating me on making the Pro Bowl. However, if you're consistently making the playoffs, which is something my team only did once, you're probably going to see some more X factor scenarios mixed in there as well. And then lastly here we have impact, and for this I'm going to start with everything that was earned over the course of the 5 seasons that was positive. I'm not going to go through each individual thing here, but everything you're seeing is a sum of what was earned for that player, unit, or position group. So for example, Nate Mayer was part of the mentorship scenario 4 different times, and everything he earned from that is consolidated into his one line. I also didn't include the coach XP that I received from the beat reporter scenarios triggering after losses, which ended up giving me an additional 600 coach XP. But as you can see, a pretty wide range of bonuses, but one thing here that I have to emphasize is that if I was actually playing the games, there would be a lot more here and these bonuses would be a lot larger. In simulating the games, the failure rate of all the goals that I encountered was 67%, factoring in every goal that I received, and that failure rate jumped to 77% when treating 2-part goal scenarios as a failure when one part of the goal was passed and the other was failed. The sim engine doesn't really factor in scenarios, and as a user you're going to be more aware of and intent on accomplishing these scenarios, which is obviously going to enhance the rewards that you're going to receive. One big example of this is the breakout player scenarios. All 3 that I saw during the simulation were failed, and had they been accomplished, each player would have received a dev boost and a large chunk of XP, so that's where a huge difference lies in simulating the games versus actually playing them. But that's a look at the rewards and the positive outcomes. Now it's time to take a look at the negatives. And yeah, this isn't a mistake. This is a collective look at all of the negative outcomes that I received over the course of the 5 seasons. 13 individual morale points and 4 across the entire team. And the reality here is that it's not even really that, because when you look at the situations here, Emmanuel Sanders went down 1 morale point from the frustrated receiver scenario, but it was only after gaining 3 morale points for being told that I would get him involved, so it was still a net gain of 2 morale. The team morale losing 4 points was the result of 4 different short week and bye week scenarios where I chose extra prep over resting the players, and making that choice also came with 600 XP for the entire team. So again, while I did lose those 4 morale points, it didn't come without gaining 600 XP for my entire roster each time. Nelson Aguilar was part of 2 different frustrated receiver scenarios, one where I told him I'd get him involved and he gained 3 morale for that, and then after a 3 reception 22-yard game he lost 3 morale points, meaning the whole scenario scenario was just a push and his morale was no lower after the scenario than it was before it. The second time around, I made no promises and the entire offense had their morale go up 1 point, and after a 4-catch, 28-yard game, he again lost 3 morale points, meaning it was a net loss for him, but still a positive overall gain for the team. Cortland Sutton was the same story where I made no promises, so the entire offense gained 1 point of morale, and then after the week, Sutton lost his 1 morale point, putting him back where he started, so once again, a push for him and a gain for the entire team. And then Edward Lawson there was the only scenario that I encountered in all 5 seasons where there was an outright loss. I told him I'd get him involved and he went up 3 morale points, and then after a 7-catch, 56-yard game, he went down 5 morale points for a net loss of 2. So that's basically 1 scenario out of the 89 that I faced over the course of 5 seasons where I was actually negatively impacted, and it was only by 2 morale points on 1 player. I'm going to try not to go too much into this because I don't really want to rant, and it's pretty much what I expected. I don't know if I expected it to be this bad, but in short, this isn't how you make franchise interesting at all. I mentioned this in a tweet a couple weeks ago, but part of what makes decisions feel meaningful and impactful is knowing that tough decisions and failure comes with consequences. Losing comes with consequences, and things aren't always going to go your way. And if Madden wants the scenario engine or franchise mode as a whole to be something that people enjoy and are passionate about and want to play for longer than 1 season, this approach absolutely has to change. The training wheels have to come off, and the thought of scaring users away at the first glimpse of adversity can't be so absolutely terrifying. And literally the last thing I want to do is sit here and bash this feature because, as I've said before, and you guys will continue to see in the future, I'm a big believer in what can be accomplished through it as well as the benefits that it can bring to franchise mode. But right now, this isn't it. It's not, and it's not even close. And if the future scenarios that get added to Madden 20 through a patch down the line continue with this same approach, it's going to be the same story then as it is now. The scenario engine does have a ton of potential, but right now it feels more like a gratification mechanic than anything, as well as an expanded version of drive goals, and that's about the nicest way that I can put it. Overall, though, the frequency is fine, and you'll see it be a routine part of your week-to-week activities. However, the variety as well as the variables are greatly lacking, which means it does get repetitive very quickly. And then the impact is just so overwhelmingly positive that even if you fail the vast majority of your goals and disregard your players' wishes, you're at the very worst going to come out of situations the same as you entered them, and more often than not in a more beneficial position. In addition to that, if you choose to play as an owner, the amount of scenarios you'll see are drastically lower than what you'll see as a player or a coach. Also, the CPU and other non-user controlled teams around the league aren't using the scenario engine, so all of the morale, XP, attribute, and dev upgrades that you pick up along the way are something the rest of the league never really has a chance at, further emphasizing the problematic nature of having outcomes be so overwhelmingly positive. But I think that's going to just about do it. If you guys want to see the Google Doc where I logged each interaction from the scenario engine, it will be available in the description below. Also in the description is a link to a thread I created on Operation Sports where you can create your own scenario for Madden. And if you have an idea for a scenario that you'd like to see within franchise mode, I definitely encourage you to put it in there. That's something that I'm going to continue to promote throughout the year and plan on having videos going over scenarios that I'd like to see within Madden. I currently have a Google Doc with 21 pages worth of scenarios, so there will be plenty to go over there. But like I said, that's going to do it here. Hope you guys enjoyed the video and have a great rest of your day. And until next time, thanks for watching.